And the Critic.
And we're zany to the max.
So's the Critic.
So just sit back and relax.
With the Critic. Because of the Critic.
Animaniacs.
With the Nostalgia Critic! Hello, if you haven't heard me the past 5 times, I'm the Nostalgia Critic, and I fucking love Animaniacs. I mean, think about it. Is there any show from our childhood that was better written, better animated, or better handled than this masterpiece? Okay, that was pretty good. But Animaniacs was still incredible. What great jokes, what great music, what absolutely unforgettable characters. And today, I'm paying homage to one of the greatest shows ever. And if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it right.
In this corner, co-creator, writer, producer, and story editor, Tom Ruger! And in this corner, writer, producer, story editor, and voice of Slappy Squirrel, Sherry Stoner! And in this corner, writer for Animaniacs as well as Freakazoid, Choppy McCann! And in this corner, writer for Animaniacs as well as the voice talent of Mr. Director and Freakazoid, Paul Rudd! And in this somehow fifth corner, voice talent of Skippy Squirrel as well as the son of Tom Ruger, Lenny Ruger! And the Italian stallion himself, the heavyweight champion of the world, Rocky Balboa! Wait, no, he's not in this. But still, we have a big chunk of the people who made one of the greatest shows ever on the video!
Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show and answering my stupid questions. This is so awesome. Let's not waste any time. I guess the first thing to start off with is how you guys all got involved with this show. And the person to probably start with is Tom, because... Am I right? You've pretty much written for every cartoon show ever created. I mean, your background's incredible. It's like He-Man, Scooby-Doo, all these huge shows. So you probably had the longest experience in animation, right?
I started as an assistant animator / in-betweener, and then made it up to animator. I began work out here at Hanna-Barbera, just kind of bizarre things like Shirt Tails and Snorks. I got a chance to story edit and co-produce a bunch of Scooby series. Then they gave me a shot to do a new version, which turned out to be a pup named Scooby-Doo. And in that one, we did a lot of sort of Tex Avery wild takes. And that show, believe it or not, was what landed me the gig on Tiny Toons.
I started out as an actress back 100 million years ago, and I was in the Groundlings. I performed at the Groundlings. And a friend of mine at the Groundlings asked if I'd be interested in maybe writing a cartoon. This was for Tiny Toons, actually. So I'd never written anything before, but I'm a huge fan of the old Warner Brothers cartoons. So I got hired on staff for Tiny Toons, and Animaniacs came along, and I jumped at the chance to develop that along with Tom Ruger and everybody.
Growing up, it was either sports or being funny, or being preyed upon. So I chose funny. Paul and I at the time were in a group called Acme Comedy Theater, which is run by Sherry Stoner's husband. She'd already been, brought on board for Tiny Toons and other shows, and when they started looking for writers for Animaniacs, they came down, they said, these guys are, lean and unemployed, they'll probably work cheaply. They're correct.
So when Animaniacs was coming up, she thought she'd just give, John and I a script, and when they were first developing it, and based on that, they hired us.
Now, how did the actual creation of the show go down? Like, what was the process?
Well, Animaniacs came from this whole success at Warner Brothers, where we had made Tiny Toons, and Mr. Spielberg and Gene McCurdy and a bunch of people decided, well, we have to make the sequel now. We were looking for the lead characters for the show. Steven said, we need a billboard name. We can't just go out there with nobody. That stuck in my head, billboard character, so I was walking across the lot one day. I saw the water tower, and I thought, well, that's kind of a, sort of a billboard.
As far as the Warner Brothers go, the initial creation of that was Tom Ruger's. I remember it being first based on his 3 kids that were 3 sons that were very small at the time, and just the chaotic element of having them in his life made him want to do something like that.
What we did was we put a whole batch of cartoon concepts together, Pinky and the Brain, Slappy Squirrel, and we took them all over to Stephen's house on a Saturday morning, which was an appropriate time. We all have like cookies and milk.
Tom would put them up on the big board. He had this big board in his office, and he would pin up names of characters that we pitched and different things like that. And then the artist would do drawings of different characters, and they sort of evolved as time went on, and some fell by the wayside and some stuck.
The last one to make the cut was Mindy and Buttons, and Mindy and Buttons had been jettisoned earlier in our little meeting. And then Stephen's family came in, including a bunch of little kids, and they went over to the Minnie and Buttons pictures and said, I like. So suddenly Minnie and Buttons were back in.
They had a Bible which was literally, I remember it was like 2 inches thick, and it was pretty much all said about what they would be. There was a list, like 5 pages, about what they thought the characters' catchphrases would be.
Paul and I had to kind of, feel our way, trying to use some of the stuff they had and then some ideas that we had.
I remember Deanna Oliver kept pushing this gecko and Chuckwalla, and of course it ultimately turned into the Geico gecko. So Deanna also was the one behind Chicken Boo. She said, we have to do this chicken, and no one realizes it's really a chicken. And it made no sense, and yet we made probably 10 of them. Nick Hollander basically did the Katie Kaboom deal based on his daughter. And of course, Sherry Stoner was, and always will be Slappy Squirrel.
Thank you, Mr. Exposition.
She brought that character in from like a Groundling skit that she had done. So we basically took the concept of Screwy Squirrel, who we all love from the Tex Avery cartoons, and turning that character into sort of an elderly, cranky squirrel. Pinky and the Brain, of course, famously were based on 2 of our artists, Tom Minton as the Brain and Eddie Fitzgerald as Pinky. Basically, those 2 characters were based around the personalities of those 2 writer, director, artists. Minton and Eddie Fitzgerald would be in the room next door, and you'd hear Minton go, and Eddie going, North!
God, Brian, brilliant!
That's where the whole Pinky the Brain concept came from, because I always felt that they were plotting to take over the world.
Now that's interesting because I always thought maybe Pinky was Hugh Laurie from Blackadder or something, and I could have sworn that Brain was Orson Welles. He looks and talks like Orson Welles. Was there any inspiration for that?
The voice actor doing the Brain, the beloved Maurice LaMarche, he would always warm up the same way. He warmed up doing the exact word-for-word recording session of an old Orson Welles commercial where Orson Welles doesn't complete the commercial. It's about, Mrs. Covington's fish products or something. And it's basically this diatribe by Orson Welles of him like going off copy on his commercial and getting real ticked off at the engineer in the booth.
Get me a jury and show me how you can say ends your line, and I'll go down on you.
That was where the Brain's voice came from. It came from Maurice just loving this Orson Welles impression, and we said, yeah, I think that'll work.
So was that, this is probably a stupid question, but was that the inspiration for Yes Always, which is a cartoon where the Brain does a voice audition, and almost quotes word for word every line that Orson Welles said in those auditions?
It is exactly the inspiration for that particular segment. And that's the only Animaniacs cartoon in which I actually did my own voice.
Come on, Brain. I write all your best material.
Shakespeare wrote my best material. You write drivel unfit for a light bulb commercial.
Peter's in it, and Andrea Romano's in it, and basically the Brain is just ripping into us.
The finest prairie-fed beef and taste. This is a lot of tripe, you know that.
The finest prairie-fed beef and taste. This is a lot of shit, you know that.
Now, your son, Nate, was the voice of Skippy Squirrel, which of course is a huge part, but on top of that, maybe even more iconic, he was the voice of Baby Plucky from Tiny Toons. And I can tell you right now, everybody in my school was always quoting the potty years. We'd always see, "Water go down the hole."
Water go down the hole.
And I'm wondering, Nate, how did you get into this? Was this something that you really wanted to do, or did your father force you to do it, or how did it work?
I came to the voice of Baby Plucky because of my youngest brother, Cody. Cody was 2 or 3 at the time, and he was the inspiration for Baby Plucky. Everything we remember Baby Plucky for, like taking everything he could find and flushing it down the toilet, getting into an elevator and pushing all the buttons.
Elevator go down the hole.
My youngest brother, Cody, did that. And my dad probably thought that was good television, was writing that up.
Yeah, but those were cartoons and this is real life.
Don't tell him. He might crack.
I was the lead in our first grade production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. So my 7-year-old brain registered that as, oh, I'm going to be a huge actor someday. And I just begged my parents to take me to like every type of like audition for movies and theater, and some reason they encouraged me.
I had to get him out of the city, away from all those bad influences.
You mean like peace and love?
Exactly.
So at that point, I think it was a no-brainer for my dad to ask me to do kind of an impression of my younger brother Cody as the voice of Baby Plucky. And so that's pretty much how I got my first job in show business, by making fun of my baby brother on national television.
I knew that I could get my kids to perform it the way I needed it to be. So it's a kind of almost a control thing that my prob.
He knows me better than anyone, pretty much. And so very often for a lot of the Skippy episodes, if he didn't write it, he was very involved with the writing. So the dialogue always came out that Skippy's character and his dialogue would fit me like a glove, so it was very easy. It was never strange, but it did get embarrassing. As anyone's father can be, but in these cases, there'd be times, the ones I remember, where I was supposed to give a laugh, and it wasn't as big a laugh as they needed, and so my dad would slowly sneak into the recording booth and start tickling me. And there I was, like, giggling like an idiot with my dad tickling me in front of this room filled with Hollywood professionals.
Now, like Sherry said, a lot of Tom's inspiration, it looks like, came from you kids. Was there anything that you specifically came up with that made it into the show, even though you were just like a little child at the time?
None of my ideas or episodic storylines or characters or anything like that from me got into the story, got into the show Animaniacs, except for this one line. My dad was working on the main theme for Animaniacs, coming up with the lyrics, and he had run out of words that rhymed with Animaniacs.
I know that I spent like a week writing the Animaniacs theme song lyrics, and I probably had like 7 different versions, all with different words.
He had Dot is cute and Yakko yaks, Wacko packs away the snacks, and didn't have the rest of it. It just so happened that I saw on TV that day that our current president enjoyed playing the saxophone in his spare time. So I chimed in with Bill Clinton plays the sax. And that got into the final cut of the song.
Wacko packs away the snacks while Bill Clinton plays the sax. We're Animaniacs.
It rhymes. It's amazing.
Now, for all of you, when I think of writers on a show, especially a comedy show, I think of Dick Van Dyke. I think of everybody packed in a room and they're all shouting ideas and they're saying, oh, that's great, what's the next line, what's the next line? And did the process work that way, or was it very much an individual process?
There wasn't like, sort of like the Dick Van Dyke thing where we're all sitting in a room together going, okay, what's the next line? We would all go away and, sort of struggle over the scripts.
It wasn't like, the sitcom method where you sit in a room and you break a story and, everybody kind of throws out their 2 cents.
You would come up with ideas for characters, for different stories for different characters, and you'd pitch the idea to Tom, and he'd say, yeah, that sounds good, go write it, that kind of thing. I do remember that Paul Rugg wrote a lot of the Warner Brothers cartoons because he was especially good at that.
Paul, God bless him, he's one of the funniest people on earth and one of the most talented writers on earth. But boy, when he's into a script and he's struggling with it, when it's not going perfectly, it's like you can just see the pain.
I remember I was having problems with an episode called Hearts of Twilight. It was a parody of Hearts of Darkness. And sometimes you get yourselves into a big problem because you're like, boy, wouldn't it be funny if the Warners had to go up studio in a golf cart and sort of stop a director who was spending millions of dollars, and that director would be, Mr. Director, sort of Jerry Lewis and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's, And I think I wrote the first 2 pages of that for like a week and a half. And finally I was like, I didn't know what to do. So I went into Tom's office and I said, Tom, I just don't get it. I think I should work on something else. And I remember the only time Tom ever got mad at me, he said, no, this is too expensive. You need to finish it. So I went back in my room and cried a little bit, and then I sort of figured it out.
So you were satirizing a documentary about a person slowly going crazy while making a movie about a person slowly going crazy, and you yourself were slowly going crazy.
That made me cry, but, it was fun. I'm over it now.
It happened because Paul Rugg was writing in that room for like 3 weeks, and his brain was bleeding, and it finally came out.
Paul! How'd you with the going? You were there, but here now.
From the look of things, it seemed like there was a lot of freedom, and I know it's a cliche to be like, they don't make them like in the old days, but it almost does sort of seem like that. And I guess what I'm wondering is, was Animaniacs just one of those rare experiences where everything just seemed to go right and everything clicked, or are these experiences really like a dime a dozen?
Well, that was really my first real writing job, and so I now have learned that it doesn't go that well.
You know, it's like we got our dessert first in animation, and then you know, as time went on, we learned what beans tasted like.
Some of the head guys at Warner Brothers, the big mucky muck, said, well, you can't do shorts. Whatever you do, don't do shorts. And we said, well, why not? And it's because there's no precedent. No one knows how to do them. You have no model to follow, which is hilarious because, of course, there were 35, 40 years of these gems, these 7-minute gems.
Most shows, it's 3-act structure. You know what you're gonna do. Stories have a beginning, middle, end. They're half hours. They're 11 minutes. You know, it's much more simpler and easier on the editing budget.
Quite a few of the writers that eventually came on to work on Animaniacs were people that I knew through sketch comedy. And they weren't animation writers per se when they started out. In fact, not at all. John McCann and Paul Rugg and Peter Hastings and Deanna Oliver, these are people that I all knew from sketch comedy. The first thing that they wanted to be was funny. None of us knew exactly the wrong way to do it, or the right way to do it, so we just did it the best we could in the funniest way we could.
Mostly we had Tom Ruger as a great producer. And he would bring us all in. People would say, well, I think I want to write one where they goof on Albert Einstein. And normally it was like, great, you have a go do that. That'll be great. And today, in a lot of shows I've been doing, you can say, yeah, I want to have them goof on Albert Einstein, and then it's like, okay, good, go away and write exactly what that would be, but don't write it. So you do sort of a 3-page outline about what'll happen. The nice thing about Animaniacs was there was really none of that.
You'd get assigned a script, and that'd be your script. It was loose. I mean, ultimately, it was your job to get the script done and get it in, but you had plenty of help there to get you through the rough spots.
There was a lot of freedom. We didn't really have a lot of people hovering over us, telling us what to do, or telling us that was inappropriate to do, or that kids wouldn't get this or that or the other.
I personally never had as much freedom before or after than I had during the Animaniacs.
Sometimes in a network there are 50 people reading your script, and you'll get competing notes from different people. And we didn't really have that. It went to Tom Ruger, go off to Steven Spielberg, and that was it.
We were very, very lucky in that regard. I mean, it certainly changed now.
This was at the dawn of the imitatable behavior thing. So, they were afraid that any behavior with a common household object that children could imitate would, in turn lead them to do that and then, trigger a lawsuit.
It's certain educational elements that have to be involved when you're dealing with certain hours of the day for television and all of that stuff that I still don't understand.
There was a scene in Dracula where it was something about turning into a bat. Wacko pulls out an actual bat and hits the vampire. Well, they didn't care for that. They said you can't use a real bat. Tom Ruger, in a masterful stroke, got around it by putting wings on the wooden bat, and somehow that made it okay.
So a bat with bat wings was okay, but a bat without bat wings was corrupting the youth of America. All I gotta say is that I'm glad most houses don't have anvils and mallets lying around.
Right. Dynamite, except for certain areas of the Southwest. We're safe there.
If we got any sort of inkling that somebody wanted us to be more educational or have more of a theme, then we would mock that, like with the Wheel of Morality, that sort of thing.
Wheel of Morality, turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we should learn. Moral number 2. And the moral of today's story is...